There is a kind of relationship pain that does not hit like a clean ending. It lingers, it stretches out, it keeps you emotionally involved while quietly draining your clarity, your standards, and your ability to call the situation what it is. This is the pattern where the connection sounds beautiful, feels meaningful, and still leaves your real life with that person unstable, hard to trust, and exhausting to carry. The moments are warm, the words are soft, the bond feels alive. But once the moment passes, nothing solid is different. You are still waiting, still wondering, still trying to make emotional meaning do the work that everyday reality never does. That is what this is about. Sweet words, but nothing you can actually count on changes. And this kind of pain keeps people stuck far longer than obvious rejection, because it does not feel cold enough to leave quickly. It does not look harsh enough from the outside. It often looks deep, nuanced, tender, and emotionally complicated. That is exactly why it is so hard to walk away from. If this kind of clarity helps your nervous system settle, subscribe. PsychBond is a daily decoder for psychology, relationships, and avoidant and anxious attachment patterns, so you stop guessing. This is where proof versus hope thinking matters. Not because you need to become cynical, not because emotional moments mean nothing, but because your heart keeps asking one question, while your nervous system needs a different one. Your heart wants to know, did they mean it? Your body needs to know, what is actually different now? That is the whole shift. Not what the words felt like while they were being said, not how sincere the tone sounded in that one conversation, not how vulnerable they seemed when they were afraid of losing you. What became more steady after the moment ended? What became easier to trust in real life? What became simpler? What became clearer? What became less painful to live inside? That is the question that protects people. Because many anxious people do not stay only because they are attached to the person. They stay because they are attached to what the words seem to promise. A soft message can feel enormous when you have been starving for reassurance. One vulnerable conversation can feel like movement when you have been living with distance, gaps, vagueness, and emotional inconsistency. A single warm night can feel like proof that the whole relationship is finally turning. That does not mean you are foolish. It means hunger changes the value of what you receive. If you have been bracing for coldness, one moment of tenderness can feel safer than it actually is. If you have been starving for something clear, one emotionally honest conversation can feel bigger than the whole pattern. Your body is not stupid. It is trying to stabilize around anything that looks like connection. But relief is not the same as change. A moving moment is not the same as a different relationship. That is the part people keep missing. The words are not always fake. In fact, that is often why this pattern steals so much time. If the softness felt hollow, leaving would be easier. If the tenderness sounded rehearsed, your body would stop reaching much sooner. Often, the feeling in the words is real. Often, the avoidant person truly does care. They may miss you. They may feel attached. They may feel genuine fear when they sense you slipping away. They may feel tenderness, longing, regret, and confusion all at once. They may absolutely mean what they say while they are saying it. But real feeling and real follow-through are not the same thing. Real tenderness and daily reliability are not the same thing. Someone can care deeply and still not offer a bond that becomes easier to trust over time. That is where people break themselves. Their heart is responding to emotional truth. Their life with that person is still being shaped by inconsistency, ambiguity, and uncertainty. And when those two things stay split for too long, you start fraying. You become someone who cannot fully settle and cannot fully leave. Someone who keeps getting pulled open by moments while still having no stable place to stand. Someone who keeps thinking maybe this is becoming something, while their day-to-day experience remains full of waiting, guessing, bracing, and emotional whiplash. That is exhausting, in a way people around you do not always understand. Because from the outside, it can look like there is so much here. There may be chemistry, there may be history, there may be tenderness, there may be real conversations, there may be unmistakable feeling. But when the everyday experience of the relationship still leaves you underfed, underheld, and uncertain, the emotional richness does not cancel the cost. This is why proof versus hope thinking matters so much in avoidant dynamics. It asks a colder and far more useful question. If I stop grading this bond on emotional moments and start grading it on what I can actually count on, what is left? If I stop measuring this connection by how meaningful the high points feel and start measuring it by how livable it is in ordinary life, what am I left with? If I removed the warmth of the best conversations, the softness in the best moments, the eye contact, the chemistry, the tenderness, the long texts, the vulnerable explanations, what would the relationship itself actually be giving me to stand on? That question is brutal, because a lot of bonds get much thinner once you stop feeding them with emotional interpretation. You begin to see how often the connection comes alive in moments of possible loss, and how little changes once the fear settles down. You begin to see how often the timing of the sweetness matters. It shows up when you are tired, when you are pulling back, when the distance between you starts to feel too large, when they can feel the bond slipping, when the tension needs softening. And again, that does not automatically mean bad intent, but it does mean the words may be doing a job other than building something you can trust. They may be calming the moment. They may be reviving closeness. They may be lowering your guard. They may be keeping the bond emotionally alive without changing the actual terms you are living under. That is a hard truth, because it sounds less romantic than the emotional surface of the relationship. Many people would rather believe the words are evidence of hidden depth than admit the words may simply be easier than change. But for many avoidant people, that is exactly what happens. Emotional language can be easier than steadiness. A sincere apology can be easier than consistency. A tender message can be easier than direct clarity. A beautiful explanation can be easier than making the relationship more defined, more dependable, and more honest in everyday life. That is why sweet words can be so powerful and so misleading at the same time. They are not always empty. They are just cheaper than change. They cost less than reliability. They cost less than showing up differently over time. They cost less than making choices that make the bond less confusing. Once you see that, so much starts to clear. You stop asking only whether the words mattered emotionally. You start asking whether they changed what this relationship is actually giving you. That is one of the most important shifts in this whole topic. Because anxious attachment often gives emotional openness too much authority. When someone who is usually guarded finally says something vulnerable, it can feel sacred. It can feel like a moment you should not question too hard. You think, this was hard for them to say, so maybe I should be patient. You think, this is the most they have ever opened up, so maybe that means everything is changing. You think, I could hear the truth in their voice, so maybe I need to stop focusing on what is still missing. But emotional honesty is not the same as relational capacity. Someone can open up and still not become easier to rely on. Someone can reveal real feeling and still leave you living inside the same uncertainty. Someone can sound deeply sincere and still not be able to carry what their own words awaken in you. That is the piece people keep resisting, because it sounds harsh. But it is not harsh. It is grown up. A moving moment can be real and still not be enough. A person can be sincere and still not be ready, able, or willing to build something steadier. A connection can feel profound and still not become safer to live inside. This is why sincerity is not the same as sufficiency. It matters that they meant it, if they meant it. But that does not answer the practical question your nervous system is living with. Is this becoming something I can trust? Is this becoming something I can rest inside? Is this becoming something that asks less of my tolerance for ambiguity, less of my ability to decode, less of my willingness to keep surviving on almost? If the answer keeps being no, then the sweetness may be meaningful, but it is still not enough to support the amount of hope you are carrying. And that is where hope gets very expensive. Hope hears one soft sentence and starts writing a future. Hope hears, I do not want to lose you, and starts imagining movement that has not happened. Hope hears, this is hard for me too, and turns that into a reason to stay longer. Hope hears, I care about you, and acts as if caring automatically means the relationship will eventually become more dependable. But caring is not the same as changing. Missing you is not the same as becoming reliable. Being scared is not the same as being clear. Feeling deeply is not the same as making the bond safer. This is where many people stay trapped, because the sweetness feels like progress even when the pattern itself stays the same. One emotionally deep conversation, then the same uncertainty. One tender explanation, then the same vagueness. One reassuring moment, then the same distance once the immediate tension passes. One return full of feeling, then the same lack of follow-through when ordinary life starts again. That pattern wears people down because each warm moment resets their willingness to keep waiting. Each beautiful conversation interrupts their clarity. Each soft return makes it harder to fully trust what the last month has been showing them. That is why these bonds can take so much longer to leave than the obviously cold ones. It is hard to grieve something that keeps reviving itself emotionally without becoming more real practically. It is hard to let go when enough is happening to feel attached, but not enough is happening to feel safe. It is hard to call the situation what it is when the emotional moments keep making the whole thing feel more special than the day-to-day reality deserves. That is why the question cannot only be, did they mean it? The better question is, what happened next? What happened after the sweet words? The next day? the next week, the next time you needed clarity, the next time the bond had to carry real life instead of just emotional intensity. Did anything become easier to trust? Did anything become more direct? Did anything become more dependable? Did you stop having to work so hard internally just to stay in it? Or did the same cracks keep opening under new emotional light? That is the answer. Not because the words meant nothing, but because the words do not outrank the repeated experience of your life with this person. There is another reason this pattern keeps people hooked. Sweet words create doubt about your own standards. You start thinking, maybe I am too focused on what is missing. Maybe I am not appreciating what is actually here. Maybe this is just a slower person. Maybe what we have is deeper than labels. That is how the bond starts moving your inner line without you noticing. You are no longer asking only whether this feels good. You are asking whether you are allowed to want a relationship that makes sense. And once a person gets you to that point, even unintentionally, you start spending more energy managing yourself than reading what is in front of you. You rehearse before bringing things up. You soften your language. You try not to seem needy. You trim down your needs so the conversation stays easier for them to handle. You become careful with your timing, your wording, your emotional volume, and your expectations. And every time they respond with another soft explanation, instead of something steadier, the bond teaches you the same lesson again. Stay emotionally available. Ask for less. Be moved by the moment. Do not expect too much after it. That is a terrible lesson, because now the relationship is not only uncertain, it is shaping what feels reasonable to ask for. This is where a lot of people stop trusting their own appetite for stability. They start acting like wanting consistency is too practical for something this emotionally deep. But emotional depth that never turns into something more dependable is exactly what makes these situations so expensive. You are carrying the weight of a serious bond without getting the safety of one. You are absorbing the emotional consequences of intimacy without getting the daily reality that usually makes intimacy feel worth it. And over time, that creates a strange kind of loneliness. You can feel deeply connected to someone and still feel alone inside the relationship. You can feel emotionally chosen in moments and still feel abandoned by the overall pattern. You can feel seen in conversation and still feel unseen by how little changes in real life. That split is brutal, and people often stay because they keep hoping the emotional side will eventually pull the practical side up with it. They think if the feeling is real enough, maybe the rest will catch up. But that is exactly what has to be tested instead of assumed. Does it ever catch up? Does the tenderness lead to a steadier life together? Do the sweet words lead to something more reliable? Or do you keep getting emotional access without practical change? That is the difference between being touched and being held. Being touched means the person reaches you emotionally. Being held means what happens next makes your life less chaotic, not more. Being touched can happen in a single message. Being held has to show up over time. And if you confuse those two things, you will keep mistaking emotional contact for actual safety. Another thing people miss here is that the bond can become extremely persuasive simply because it keeps making you responsible for interpretation. Nothing is stable enough to just be taken at face value. So your mind starts working overtime. What did they mean by that? Was that progress? Was that fear? Was that a sign of real movement? And the more effort you put into understanding the words, the less energy you have left to judge the pattern honestly. A lot of the time, complexity is not depth. It is instability with better language around it. Depth usually becomes more real over time. Instability keeps making you interpret. The bond should not need endless translating to feel real. At some point, what matters has to become visible in ordinary life. At some point, what they feel has to change what you can count on. At some point, the relationship has to stop being a guessing game with beautiful highlights. This is also where people need to stop assuming that pain plus tenderness equals love. Sometimes, pain plus tenderness just equals a bond that keeps reopening the same wound in a prettier way. And if you do not challenge that, you can stay loyal to a relationship that keeps proving it is strongest in emotionally charged moments and weakest in everyday reality. It feels most alive when something is threatened, when someone is scared, when distance needs to be closed, when detachment is in the air. But what about normal days? What about boring days? What about stressful days? Can the relationship stand on its own legs there? Or does the emotional spark keep doing all the heavy lifting while the actual bond stays underbuilt? That is the proof question, not whether there is feeling, whether there is enough substance around the feeling for your body to rest. If the answer keeps being no, then the cost of staying gets high. You start carrying hope like a second job. You keep waiting for things to line up. You keep giving the bond one more talk, one more chance to become what the words keep hinting at. And that waiting changes you. It can make you less direct, less trusting, and more available to emotional rescue than to steady love. That is why this way of thinking is so important. It pulls you out of the spell. It asks, what would I call this if I stopped grading it on beauty and started grading it on what it is actually like to live inside? That answer may hurt, but it also gives people their footing back. This is also where people get trapped by potential. They say this person has depth. They say this person has real feeling underneath the fear. They say this person is not shallow, not casual, not indifferent. Fine. But potential does not calm your Tuesday. Potential does not answer direct questions. Potential does not reduce confusion. Potential does not make honesty easier. Potential does not stop the emotional drop after closeness. Potential does not give your body something dependable to settle into. Potential is only valuable if it starts becoming real life. Otherwise, it is just emotionally expensive imagination. That is why proof versus hope thinking asks something much more useful than whether the connection feels deep. It asks whether the relationship is becoming livable. It asks whether your life inside this bond is getting calmer, clearer, and more grounded over time. It asks whether the person is becoming more knowable in ordinary life, not just more moving in emotionally charged moments. It asks whether your nervous system is working less hard now than it was before. That is what matters. Not whether the sweetness was beautiful. Not whether the chemistry is intense. Not whether the tenderness feels rare. What matters is whether your real life with them is becoming easier to stand in. And if it is not, then you are probably living on emotional credit. You are letting the high points cover the cost of the whole pattern. You are using beautiful language to negotiate against what your actual experience has been trying to tell you. That is not weakness. It is what happens when a bond keeps giving you enough to stay emotionally hopeful while still not giving you enough to feel secure. There is also another layer here that people do not like naming because it sounds unromantic. Sometimes the sweet words are not moving the relationship forward. They are managing the bond. They calm the tension. They stop the disconnection from becoming final. They soften your exit. They pull you back toward the emotional center of the bond right when you were starting to see more clearly. This does not always mean somebody is consciously manipulating you, but impact matters even when intent is blurry. If the words repeatedly calm you down without making your life with them less uncertain, then the words are doing a different job than the one your heart wants to believe they are doing. Your heart wants to believe the words mean something solid is being built. Your nervous system is still being asked to live inside almost. Almost clarity, almost commitment, almost consistency, almost peace, almost being chosen in a way that is real enough to relax into, and almost can waste years because it sounds so close to eventually. That is why people start grading the bond on sincerity instead of evidence. They say, "But they opened up. But I know that was hard for them. But the conversation mattered. But I could hear the truth in their voice. But they are trying in the only way they know how." That may all be true. And still, the main question does not change. Is this becoming easier to trust? If the answer is no, then the emotional meaning of the moment does not erase the practical reality you are still living with. You can be touched and still be honest. You can appreciate their humanity and still admit this is not enough. You can hear their tenderness and still say, this relationship is not becoming something I can rest inside. That is not cruel. It is sane. This is where so many people need permission. They need permission to stop treating emotional depth like a substitute for steadiness. They need permission to stop calling a bond profound just because it hurts and sounds beautiful. They need permission to stop acting like being asked to survive on emotionally rich uncertainty is somehow romantic. It is not. It is exhausting. It trains you to become grateful for moments instead of honest about the whole picture. It trains you to treat basic dependability like a luxury. It trains you to feel severe for wanting what should be normal. It trains you to use the other person's good moments against your own clarity. That is why this pattern is so dangerous. The sweetness does not only comfort you, it can slowly teach you to doubt your right to expect more than emotional flashes. And once that starts happening, the words stop being only words. They become the thing you use to talk yourself out of your own knowing. You tell yourself, they care, so maybe I should not be so affected. You tell yourself, they are trying, so maybe I should not need more yet. You tell yourself, that conversation was real, so maybe I should trust the feeling over the facts. That is how people lose themselves. Not because they see nothing, but because they keep emotionally overruling what they already see. So if you want one clean test for this whole pattern, it is this. After the beautiful words, is your life with them easier or harder to trust? The next week, the next month, the next time your needs show up, the next time the relationship has to carry ordinary reality instead of one emotional peak. Does the bond become more solid? Or do the same problems keep reappearing under a softer tone? If the same problems keep reappearing, then the answer is there. The words may be real. The tenderness may be real. The affection may be real. But what the relationship is giving you is also real. And that part matters just as much. That is why proof versus hope thinking matters so much in avoidant attachment. Not because you need to become cynical, because you need a way to stop letting moving words outrank your actual life. You need a way to respect tenderness without letting tenderness erase repeated evidence. And most of all, you need a way to stop asking your nervous system to keep believing what the relationship keeps failing to prove. Because the bond does not become safer because the words are sweet. It becomes safer when what happens after the sweet words is different in real life. Until that changes, the message may be beautiful, but the pattern is still telling the truth. Welcome to PsychBond. You're safe here.